Welcome, everybody. Hi, hi, hi. Happy Wednesday. We're going to give it just 1 minute to let everybody come into the room. Very excited. As always with our events, the chat is open. Feel free to share where you're watching from. And there'll be time for questions, certainly, in about 35 to 40 minutes after we chat a little bit. And no cooking substitution questions today. Oh, great. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Shannon Sarna. I'm editor of The Nasher. I'm very honored and excited to be able to moderate this chat today with two women that I admire and respect so much, and also learn from every time I have the chance to speak to them. So I'm sure everyone here today will get so much out of this conversation. So I want to start by introducing our speakers. Jana Gore is a Tel Aviv-based cookbook author, journalist, speaker, and culinary expert, not an exporter. She was born in Riga, Latvia. I always forget that, and immigrated to Israel in 1974. I will mess this up. So she is a founder of a very prominent premier Israeli food and wine magazine called Al
HaShulchan, on the table, simple.
Which she edited for almost 30 years, and is the author of the Book of New Israeli Food, Jewish Soul Food, From Mince to Marrakesh, and Shuk, From Market to Table, The Heart of Israeli Home Cooking, that she co-authored with Innat and Moni, and The Galilee Table with Yusuf Zuzu Hana. By the way, I have almost all of those books on my shelf, and if you have never seen them, you should order them. They are absolute go-tos for me, week to week for holidays. I love them, and I've learned so much from them. She's developed and edited nearly 40 cookbooks, many of them national bestsellers in Israel, and for the last 2 decades, she has been lecturing extensively about Israeli and Jewish food culture, as well as developing and leading culinary tours in Israel. Jana, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Some of you may know Vera Gutman from the wonderful cooking classes that she shares with the Nasher and 70 Faces community. She is an Israeli chef, food writer, and food historian living in Washington, D.C. area. Her columns and articles on Israeli and Jewish food appear in Haaretz and the Washington Post, Slate, Moment Magazine, NPR, and many others. As a chef and caterer, Vered specializes in Israeli and Middle Eastern cuisines. She's catered private parties, diplomatic events, and corporate receptions, and in 2014 cooked for President Obama's Passover Seder at the White House. And she has just a wealth of recipes and wonderful ideas on her website, veredgutman.com. And I am always learning things, the way that things should be cooked from her. So thank you both so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today. I want to start with just a small question, just really minor. This question could probably take up an entire hour, but we'll get through it a little quicker than that. What is Israeli food? How do we define it? Jana, I'm going to let you kick us off.
Okay, so first of all, I'm very glad you didn't say Israeli cuisine, because I think it's much too early to refer to whatever we have in Israel as cuisine. It takes ages to develop one, but it's definitely something that we know as Israeli food, maybe Israeli food culture. It's a cuisine in the making, it's a baby cuisine, so to speak, and I think it is comprised of 4, maybe 5 elements. The first most obvious one is, of course, the local cuisine. And when I talk about local cuisine, I mean cuisine of the local Arabic/Palestinian population, which is extremely influential on Israeli cooking. It's a very important part of Israeli cooking. And of course, you all know what I'm referring to, from hummus to falafel to labaneh, etc., za'atar, etc., etc. And it's clear because you cannot create a food culture without connecting to local terroir, and people who've been living here for centuries do know this terroir and use it and use the ingredients. The other equally important element are the cuisine of Jewish immigrants, Jewish diaspora that became, initially they were not really accepted as part of Israeli mainstream, not just in culinary, almost in almost every field. We had this dream of creating, the melting pot, mixing everything together and and rejecting the diaspora and creating something new. Fortunately, in later generations, people understand on all levels that heritage is important, and Jewish culinary heritage is extremely important and valuable and rich. And today, I've heard the chef saying that you cannot make a culinary career in Israel if you don't have a Moroccan grandmother. So if you don't have one, you should invent one. Because it's not, we have lots of dishes from the Jewish diaspora. Most of them are from the Middle East, from the Balkans, from the Sephardic Jews, very few Ashkenazi. So it's actually Jewish diaspora with a very strong Middle Eastern and North African slant. So that's the second element. The third one is our vegetables, I think. Israeli food culture is one of the most vegetable forward food cultures I know. We insist on having salad for breakfast, then for lunch and maybe for dinner as well. Raw vegetables, grilled vegetables are a very important part of our culture. Vegetables in Israel taste terrific. Israel is an agriculture superpower, so it has an important place as well. And number four is the fact that even though we are exposed to all of these culinary traditions and culinary cultures, we're not necessarily committed to a single one, which allows for endless creativity. Israeli chefs, as opposed to our neighbors, let's say Greek, Turkish, Lebanese, Jordanian, Egyptian cuisines, which are all very traditional, and there is a lot of respect for tradition. In Israel, we just are free to mix and match all of these traditions. More than that, in order to be a successful Israeli chef, you're expected to innovate, you're expected to come up with new combination. And if you think about the home cooking, which by the way is the fifth element of this unique formula that makes up Israeli cuisine, the fact that we are a cooking nation. People actually cook a lot in Israel at home. Home cooking is also a fusion because people intermarry, because my daughter is married to a guy who is half Yemenite, quarter Egyptian, quarter Syrian. I come from Latvia, and on my mother's side from Romania. And on our table, all of these traditions just mix up in the most natural way. So the sum total of all that, and probably something else I haven't thought about, is what actually is our Israeli food culture today. Who knows what will happen in 8 years?
Well, we'll save that question for the very end. I think that's a great transition into asking Vered, like, how do you see Israeli food? How do you explain it if someone asks?
It's so difficult. But I actually think that there is such thing as Israeli cuisine. And I'll explain, but to do that, I think I can maybe add a sixth element to the five that Jana just mentioned that are so true and are very correct and precise in explaining Israeli cuisine. And I think the sixth element and what makes Israeli cuisine actually a cuisine is Judaism. And of course, unfortunately, we still need to divide, just like in the society, I'm dividing here the Jews from the Palestinians in Israel. But the immigrants, like the immigrant society that is Israel, is not just a random collection, of course, from over the world. These are Jews who came from all over the Jewish diaspora. And for Jews, food always connected to religion. If you think of Shabbat, kashrut, of course, but special dishes for Shabbat, special dishes, symbolic dishes for all the holidays. It was something that was always common, like a common thread in the diaspora, but in the diaspora it was, let's say, a Jewish Moroccan, a Jewish Iraqi, Jewish Polish or Ashkenazi cuisine. When everyone came to Israel, that on itself already created a common thread. Everyone is cooking for the same holidays. Slowly, they were open to learn and to be influenced from one another. And especially, I mean, I know many people are saying, like food historians and chefs are saying, the country is too young. This cannot be yet a cuisine. I think actually maybe because it's young, we know how food helps to create an identity for people around the world. And it actually is a new thing, relatively started in the 19th century or so. So food was definitely part of helping creating an identity for the young country. It still is today, and we can say, okay, some of it was not done naturally, some of it was done by Zionists trying to ignore actually a lot of the Jewish references and creating something new, just like Jana said. But in reality, what happened later was that it's a strong Jewish influenced cuisine, centered as it always was in the diaspora around holidays and Shabbat dishes. And then, of course, there are many other elements. The strongest one, as Jana said, is the Palestinian and Arab cuisine in general, that is local, that, that Israelis love. But yeah, I hope this adds to something. We were also talking before, and I wanted to mention, this is like the story of my family, again, a mixed marriages, like a classic, very typical Israeli family and Israeli story, but it kind of gives you a sense of how food and society developed hand in hand or evolved hand in hand in Israel. So on my mother's side, my family came from Poland and part of what is Ukraine now. And my grandmother, Rachel, kept on cooking Polish, Ashkenazi food forever, of course, with adapting to what was for the little things that she was used to that were available in Israel at the time. She continued to make gefilte fish and cholent and, kigel. We're not allowed to say kigel here, but it's still called kigel or kugel. And on my father's side, my father was born in Baghdad, and his family moved to Israel in 1943 in a taxi from Baghdad to Tel Aviv. And my Iraqi grandmother, also named Rachel, she cooked Iraqi food for the rest of her life. And we would do holidays, like Iraqi Polish holidays together, and they loved each other, but they would never, ever dream of learning a recipe from one another.
That's funny.
Not to mention the reaction of the Iraqis to gefilte fish, but that's beside the point. So then my parents, when they got married, on my mother's generation, they started learning from all their friends and neighbors. My mother, like everyone else, was serving. By the way, hi, Mother, Shalom Ima, she's watching right now from Israel. My mother was serving Yemenite food next to Iraqi food, next to Moroccan carrot salad, and Russian mayo potato salad, and Hungarian desserts, and Turkish burekas, all in one meal on one table. And my generation and younger generations of chefs, they started what Jana was describing, and what Jana's magazine was helped to create, the new Israeli cuisine, the contemporary Israeli cuisine that really created a fusion of all these different influences into one dish. And that's what created this exciting new food that we love.
There was that's, by the way, that's so funny about your grandmother's. Also, it sounds like your sons need to have a daughter and to name her Rachel, right? It feels like they know this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Not soon, I hope, but yes, thank you.
Fine. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
If there was one dish, or are there dishes that you would say, like, this is a uniquely Israeli food, right? This was a creation in Israel. This is an outgrowth of Israeli culture and society. What would that be? Is it sabich? Is it borechas? Is it schnitzel? Is it pita? Like, what would those dishes be for you, or which wouldn't they be? Donna, I'll ask you first.
Okay, sure. So again, we discussed it during our early talk. It's very tempting to say burekas, but burekas, they're very Israeli. Burekas. Okay, let's take one step back. Sabich is really unique because it's kind of street food that was invented in Israel. I'll go back to that in a moment. But almost all of the other dishes that you mentioned, schnitzel on one hand, burekas on the other, shakshuka, you can very easily connect them to their roots, even though they changed in Israel, okay? Burekas came from the Balkans, came mainly from Turkey and Bulgaria, but it changed in Israel because in the old country, burekas, by the way, burekas is plural of burek, which is the very famous Turkish dish. But burekas, the addition as, it's actually in Ladino. So we're using the Ladino name of this delicacy in Israel. And in the old country, in Turkey and Bulgaria, burekas was something you would serve for Shabbat brunch, or for Shiva, or for Brit Milah. It was a special occasion food. In Israel, it became street food. And I can talk for an hour how it happened. It has to do with Sami burekas, which you, of course, very know, and maybe you know as well. So this is a very good example of the Jewish ethnic dish, or a Jewish immigrant dish, because it's not specifically Jewish, that made its way in Israel and changed here. Same is true for shakshuka that came from North Africa, and thanks to one guy from Jaffa, whose name is Bino Gapsa, and opened Dr. Shakshuka, he kind of created this, all Israeli icon. Sabich is a bit, and of course schnitzel came from Austria, from Central Europe, but it changed because the original schnitzel is, of course, made from veal or from pork, God forbid. But in Israel, it's always chicken because this is our national meat. We're the chicken nation, salad nation and chicken nation. So sabich is different. Sabich I'll very simply put, sabich is a street food that evolved from Jewish Iraqi Shabbat breakfast, which Veretz and her family know well. They never called it sabich, because sabich was the name of a gentleman from Ramat Gan that opened up a little kiosk where he served leftovers from his wife's Shabbat table, because on Shabbat you cannot cook, so you need to have everything prepared in advance. So basically, sabich, if any of the audience doesn't know what it means, is a combination of fried eggplants, hard-boiled eggs, amba, which is this unique Iraqi condiment with Indian source. And what else? What else is in sabich, Vered?
Say egg, tahini.
Egg, tahini, and fried egg.
Sometimes.
Maybe some vegetables or something. And basically, that's the breakfast. He put everything in a pita, served it as street food, and today sabich is, I would say, even more popular than falafel. Falafel is kind of a retro thing. In Israel, sabich is, and you can, and then what happened? First, sabich evolved from being this Shabbat Iraqi brunch to street food served in a pita, but then immediately it changed, because you can go to a restaurant, even to, neighborhood cafe, and you can have deconstructed sabich minus the pita on a plate with some boiled potatoes. And I've had sabich in Toto, which is one of the most expensive restaurants in Israel. It doesn't look like sabich, it doesn't taste like sabich, but it does have eggplants and hard-boiled eggs and probably something else, and amba, of course. So, and this is Israeli food. I mean, this is this thing that, or shakshuka. Shakshuka has to be with tomatoes, okay, or peppers and eggs, basically. It's very, very simple dish. I've heard it's actually a leftover dish made from the leftovers from the spicy fish casserole that you serve on Shabbat evening. And in Israel, you can have a shakshuka with no tomatoes, shakshuka with greens, shakshuka with, I had shakshuka with seafood. I had shakshuka with mushrooms. I had eggless shakshuka, okay? Shakshuka for vegans, Israeli have a lot of vegans. So again, the name remains, but this continuous play, so it's very difficult to just name one dish. But almost every dish that we'll mention, we can trace its evolution and its kind of change of the format, I would say, or the context. And that's, for me, is the heart and soul of Israeli cooking, of Israeli food culture.
Vered, is there a dish that you would add to this conversation as being quintessentially Israeli?
I would say I would again go to the Jewish route. For example, Jerusalem kugel. Of course, we can find the roots of kugel in Ashkenazi cuisine, no doubt. But this unique caramelized, baked overnight noodle kugel is uniquely Israeli. And there are more, like if we're talking about Shabbat dishes, so chamin macaroni, it's a type of cholent made with noodles. That's also, I think, was invented later and in Israel. But I want to talk actually about falafel and how Israel is made it Israeli. And I think it actually kind of represents, in a funny way, the Israeli food. Of course, Israelis did not invent.
Lead me to my next question, Vered.
Yeah, it's evening now, so I had to change the lighting. Yeah, in Israel it's 7:30, so it's evening. Sorry about the blur.
It's
sorry.
Okay. Also, I have to say, I just saw my father there, so Shalom Abba. Israeli falafel. So Israelis did not invent the falafel balls or serving it in a pita. Of course not. There's tamia which is the equivalent in Egypt. There's falafel all over the Levant. But in Israel, the first falafel stalls were opened by Yemenite Jews. And they used the pita bread that they knew, which is saluf. It's a thick, flat bread. And they made it into a pocket, like a pita pocket type of bread. So the Israeli pita until now is a very thick, fluffy bread, unlike the pita you usually find in Arab countries and like in most falafel, at most falafel vendors in the US that are Arabs, they'll have the very thin, almost like a tortilla type of pita, very thin. That's already different. So the pita is kind of Yemenite. The falafel balls are definitely Arab, Palestinian Egyptian. But then what we put inside is the Israeli/Arab chopped salad and tahini sauce. We add the amba, which the Iraqis brought to Israel via India. It's actually a mango chutney. Many falafel stands have fried eggplant, the same one that you eat in the sabich. You add some Moroccan carrot salad, German sauerkraut, French fries, Russian mayo, cabbage salads. I'm sure I'm forgetting many. What else goes there? I mean, it depends on the stand, but it's basically a whole Jewish diaspora plus Arab food in one Yemenite pita bread, and that's very, very Israeli.
It is. It is. You know, two interesting facts about falafel. Something I learned only recently. First of all, something that Vera truly knows. Tamia, which is the Egyptian equivalent of the falafel, many other falafels in the Middle East are actually made with broad beans, with fava beans.
Yes,
in Israel, they are never made from fava beans. And you know why?
I know because I'm Iraqi.
Knows why, yeah, because very many Iraqi Jews have a certain allergy, very little one, to fava beans. So to make sure nobody gets sick, we only make falafel from chickpeas and not from fava beans. That's number one. And number two, something I learned only recently because my last book, I collaborated with a wonderful Israeli Christian chef named Yosef Hana, but to his friends, he's known as Zuzu, and he's the chef of the restaurant called Magdalena on the Sea of Galilee. And the book is actually part of, Shannon disappeared, is part of, I lost my thread of thought, but back to falafel. Okay, so it turns out that falafel has very Asian Christian roots. It was actually devised by Coptic, which are Egyptian Christian, very, very ancient sect of Egyptian Christians, and they used it as a vegan substitute for meatballs during Lent, during the 40 days when you're not allowed to have any meat or dairy. So, and I think that's the beauty. If you look at the Middle Eastern cultures, you look at the way, I've never thought before, I spoke with Vera, that actually the fact that Israeli pita is fluffier and softer than anything you could get outside of Israel, we've been talking about that, has to do with the fact that it actually evolved from Yemenite saluf. And this is the thing about Israeli food, that it's kind of, even, you know, if you go back to burekas, ask any Israeli what is the proper way to have burekas, he or she would tell you, with the hard-boiled eggs and some crushed grated tomato, right? But and tahini, of course. But if you serve that to a Bulgarian Jew, he will be appalled, because grated tomato is not part of what we call burekas complete. It's not part of the burekas meal. Apparently, this I heard from a very famous burekas bakery in Jaffa called Leon and his Sons, or Leon Bakery. They are one of the most famous burekas places in Tel Aviv. He told me that when they started serving burekas, their Yemenite customers asked, where's the grated tomatoes? Because for them, anything that is kind of pastry, because it's a very rich pastry, like jachnun, like kubane, like all these, you know, Yemenite pastries, which are always served with grated tomatoes in some schug, which is this very, very spicy condiment to cut through the fattiness of the pastry. And they asked for grated tomatoes, and they started serving grated tomatoes with the burekas, and now it's standard. But he said, I always have to make sure I never serve it to Bulgarian customers because they will be very upset. So, and that's, for me, I mean, that's the story of Israeli cuisine.
I'm sorry I cut out for a moment. We all had technical difficulties today. So I did want to talk a little bit about hummus, and how that as you described, Jana, the elephant in the room, right, of cultural appropriation. So, is Israeli food cultural appropriation? Is hummus culinary appropriation? How do you guys think about the relationship between Israeli foods, Arab foods, and how we talk about it, both within Israel and outside of Israel as well?
Okay, so this is a very hot topic. I mean, whenever Israel, you talk about anything Israeli culture, Israeli music, definitely Israeli food, the question of the political side of it is always present, and it's quite understandable. And yes, there is a lot of talk. Hummus specifically, there was, I think about 20 years ago, there was this huge scandal with the Lebanese minister or something that wanted to make sure that hummus is declared like feta cheese or parmesan, that only hummus that comes from Lebanon or Jordan can be considered hummus because it's their national treasure. And first we stole their land, now we're stealing their hummus. And it's tricky because, yes, of course, hummus is classic Levantine dish, and it's enjoyed throughout the Middle East and held in very high esteem. But Israelis discovered it for themselves. They first fell in love with hummus and then kind of made it famous worldwide. I think Israelis are to be credited or be blamed for the fact that hummus is such a huge hit around the world. So in this respect, and many others respect, in a way, Israeli chefs, Israeli cookbook authors were kind of agents of change. They kind of communicators of these cuisine, and they brought them to the world in a way. Because I've been seeing a lot of Palestinian restaurants opening up lately, a lot of Palestinian cookbooks. And I think the fact that there is such a spotlight on Israeli cuisine actually, in this respect, helps Palestinian chefs and Palestinian restaurants, Palestinian cookbooks to be published and become famous. So it is tricky. But there is one other thing about hummus, and I don't know exactly why, but maybe Vered has an idea. We've been talking a lot about the fact that Israelis are these shamelessly innovative, that have to make up, that change things all the time, that nothing is sacred and you can play with anything. It all stops when it comes to hummus. In stark contrast to what goes on in the world. I mean, hummus with sun-dried tomatoes, with garlic confit. What else do you have, guys, there?
Chocolate, hummus with chocolate, Jana.
God, I mean, this is for Israelis, this is travesty. This is a big, big no-no. I mean, we probably need one island of stability in this turbulent sea of innovation, and this is hummus. When the Israeli says, I feel like hummus, by the way, I had hummus for lunch today at my favorite neighborhood hummus joint.
Lucky.
Yes, I know. I said, when I feel like hummus, I have something very specific in mind, and I'm sure Vered knows exactly what it is. It's a plate of hummus, freshly made and warm, that has only hummus, maybe some chickpeas on top, and maybe some spicy condiment, and the pita, and maybe some pickles, and that's it. And you have it at a specific, specialized hummus joint, and you eat it with a pita, not with a fork. Okay, it's not. I mean, in the US, I know it's kind of girls' vegan food thing. In Israel, you if you don't have a pita, I mean, hummus is kind of pointless, if you ask me. So yeah, so that's another phase of that. And we are very respectful of the traditional hummus, and we want to have it just so.
Usually I make people wait for questions till the very end, but my lovely associate editor, Rachel, wants to know, what is your favorite hummus joint? This feels very important.
Oh, wow. I don't think I have one. My current one is the one that is closest to my home, which is called Hummus George. It is not famous, I mean, because, in Israel, there are a few hummus temples, I call them, like the Abu Hassan in Jaffa and like Said in Akko. And, one of the favorite topics of Israeli foodies would be, Abu Hassan is not what it used to be. Said went down into, there is a place across them that is much better. This is very Israeli kind of conversation. But this hummus George that I refer to actually is part of the hummus royalty, because his grandfather is the owner of Hummus Khalil in Ramle, which is a very famous hummus. So, recently, once there were like maybe a dozen hummus temples. Today, you have a nice hummus joint in almost every neighborhood. They're more often than not owned by Arab, but not always. There is also Jewish-owned places, but they're all very, very traditional. And you know them by the fact that they don't sell almost anything except hummus. I mean, true hummus places only serve hummus. You can smell the cooking chickpeas. It's like has a Pavlovian effect on the customers. And they're usually holes in the walls. Some bigger places, but
there's actually lately there's a new book called the Hummus Book or something like that.
On the hummus fruit,
right? Just gives you very thorough critique of the best hummus joints around the country. And people are really, Israelis are really obsessive about the hummus. My favorite hummus is still Abu Hassan, that I visited with Jana like 15 years ago or so. What's that?
It's not as it used to be. It's okay.
I cannot tell the difference then. I love it. It's just so good. And it's so, it just makes me so sad that I cannot find any real good hummus in the United States. And I tried in so many places. And like the last time I went to a fancy Israeli restaurant in New York, I had to ask the waiter to give me some lemon juice, and I added it, and then I asked for some salt, and I mixed it too, and I was too embarrassed to ask for tahini. But don't be cheap on the tahini, make it creamy as it should be, and make it lemony. And I need the tatbila sauce also, like this pickled shivka peppers, kind of spicy, but not too much sauce on it. And so it's easier to just make it at home, but I miss hummus all the time. But anyway, we were trying to talk about food appropriation and is hummus part of the issue here. I think, as we spoke from the beginning of how food traveled from the Jewish diaspora, for example, to Israel. Food travels. That's just a fact. It's not, it's a natural process. It travels with people, and it always traveled with Jews, by the way, that were expelled from one place to the other throughout history. But with the hummus and falafel and other dishes, there's the political issue, of course. So once you have, a strong political issue, once you have a people that's under occupation for 50 years, and they see, talking about the Palestinians, and they see Israelis not only enjoying their hummus, but spreading it around the world, making Americans feel that Israeli was invented by Israelis, even if Israelis never claim that, then it's something else. Then it's more difficult. It's not the natural, the way Palestinians see it. This is already not the natural evolving of cuisines. There's something other in here once the forces are not equal, once you have one occupier and occupying.
Something else that I want to mention that has to do with the relationship between the two cuisines, or between the food culture of Israelis and Palestinians. think one of the things that happened over the last decade, that Israelis, not just the chefs, I think the general public as well, have a much deeper knowledge and understanding of Levantine, of Palestinian cuisine, and with that more respect. Here's a story about one of the first authentic Arabic restaurant that opened in late 90s, called Ezba, and it's still going strong. It's in the Lower Galilee, very, very wonderful place. If you're in the area, it's definitely worth visiting. We heard rumors about that restaurant because before that, most of Israelis were convinced that Arabic food is skewers, meat skewers, brochettes, salads, mezza salads, French fries, famous Palestinian dish, French fries, and maybe hummus and tahini, and that's it basically. And so we heard about this restaurant that serves real, authentic, in this case, it was Lebanese, Levantine food that the owners learned from their mothers and grandmothers, things that we've never tasted before. I'm talking about 1995, 6-ish. And then we came to the restaurant, and I see the owner standing at the entrance of the restaurant, grilling skewers, making, alesh, as we say in Hebrew. And I said, what are you doing? I heard there is no grilled meats. He said, yes, but the Israeli customers came and they said, where are the skewers? Where are the shipudim? And I'm their host and I want to please my customers. So the bottom line is he doesn't make any grilled meats anymore. When people know what to expect, dishes that we didn't even know the name of 5 or 6 years ago are suddenly trendy. And not just the dishes, for example, the whole culture of foraging of wild greens, wild edible greens, that is a very important and very venerable tradition in Palestinian cooking, like mallows and wild chicory and thistle. There is a whole host of edible plants that can be foraged during the rainy season or even in summer and is used in cooking. Now it's one of the trendiest dishes in it. But one of the hottest trends in Israeli restaurants, so much so that some of the chefs employ forager. In addition to their vegetable supplier, they have their own forager that goes and gets these rare. So let's put it this way. As far as food is concerned, we already have peace. We've signed a peace agreement. In other areas, sadly, we're getting far from that. People know so much more about Palestinian Arabic food culture, but one of the things that a lot of Arab people say, that's the only thing you care about in our culture. You don't speak the language, you don't know anything about history, you're completely ignorant about Islam. You only regard it as this, scary thing that sometimes in the name of which people commit suicide attacks. But we really are quite ignorant, but we do know about Arabic and Palestinian food, and we love it. In a way, we all love the same food. That's what it boils down to, literally.
I guess the other way to talk about that is that food is a much easier connector, and food can bring people together more easily than...
Yeah, and it's more complicated than that, unfortunately, but... Israelis do love and appreciate Palestinian food. They're will not always call it Palestinian. And of course, Palestinian food is part of the larger Middle East, of the Levant. There was one cuisine all the way from Iraq to the sea. So Palestinian, Jordanian, Iraqi, Syrian, Lebanese were all like basically one big cuisine. So what we see as Israelis as a sign of peace and closeness, and for many Palestinians it is still a difficult subject. I interviewed Laila El-Haddad after she wrote the excellent Gazan kitchen cookbook. And, just speaking to her about her experience as someone who has a family and who herself, she lived in Gaza for a few years. Her grandmother was still there. It's a very difficult subject. They cannot separate the political part from the food, and so we're not in the stage of sitting together, kumbaya, let's share the food and have peace. We're gonna bake together or eat hummus together and everything is fine. Of course not. But maybe it's a start.
That's happened with Arabs who are citizens of Israel. There is a lot of, cooperation.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, it's complicated.
It's complicated. Yes, it is.
I want to switch gears just a little bit because I know we're going to run out of time shortly. Vered, I wanted to ask specifically what you think about in the U.S. or in other parts around the world outside of Israel, non-Jewish or non-Israeli chefs cooking Israeli food. When you see that, or have you seen that, and what's your reaction to that?
So I think it really depends on the specific chef and restaurant. I mean, if they were serious about their research and about the food and respect Israeli food, I have no problem with that. So one example, and I'm sorry, I can't remember, I should have checked. I can't remember the name of the chef in Manhattan who has the Shuket. I forgot her name. She's not Israeli or Palestinian, I think. Maybe she has, I can't remember. She did not live in Israel, but her research into the food is so serious, and I love her restaurant. It's delicious and good and respectful. So I have no problem with that as long as the research and the passion and the love and knowledge of Israeli food is really there. There's another restaurant that I know of in the US that opened the place with, a chef that spent a few years in Egypt. He visited Israel for a couple of weeks. The chef is Latin. The owners are not, they have no real connection to Israel, and you can really see that in the menu. Like, they have falafel, but they call it ta'amiyah. So you don't open an Israeli restaurant, this is just one example, and serve falafel under the name ta'amiyah. Ta'amiyah is, as we mentioned earlier, is the Egyptian name for falafel. It is made with fava beans, not with chickpeas. It's all good, but this is not Israeli. So, and there were other dishes like that. It's like opening a general Asian restaurant that serves food from China and Thailand and Singapore, and say, look, we just opened a Japanese restaurant. Come and eat with us. It's very disrespectful, and that I find annoying. But other than that, as long as the respect and real knowledge and research, I don't care who the chef is.
But something really interesting what you said right now, that people that actually places that don't sell food that is properly Israeli, even though we know that it's a very fluid definition, call themselves Israelis. This attests to the fact how popular
100%,
desirable,
100%.
Because I have an example of one of my favorite restaurants in New York, owned by a friend of mine called Barabunia. It's been around, I think, for over 20 years. And from the start, they served malabi and they served hummus and they served lots and lots of Israeli dishes. And the chef was Israeli, but they called themselves Eastern Mediterranean. They thought that calling a restaurant Israeli was not only, will help their business, it will harm their business. Today, 100%. Just the opposite. Okay, and that actually... And this is something we didn't talk about, the fact that, and probably this is the most incredible. Think about, I mean, we are sitting here talking about this amazing cuisine or food culture or what have you. 30 years ago, people would have laughed at us. I mean, the first sentence in my first book on Israeli food that was published in 2007 is nobody comes to Israel for the food. I actually stole that sentence from my very good friend, Bonnie Stern, who was one of the first to bring people over for culinary tours in Israel. And they said people would make fun at her. I mean, Israeli culinary tours, are you crazy? I mean, we are talking about a product of less than 30 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, Veron. I don't know of any, or Shannon, I don't know of any other example in the world where we saw one culture so quickly progress from being culinarily challenged to culinary destination, and one of the hottest one. And everybody knows, another friend of mine who is in the restaurant business in New York, is that everybody wants to have an Israeli chef in the kitchen, even if the restaurant is not Israeli. There is this mojo that we have. And for years, we've been talking about, okay, has it peaked already? Will it go down? Because it's all about trends, and trends change so quickly. But Vera, do you think we're kind of, it's fading?
No, not yet. And I think what makes Israeli chefs so prominent here and Israeli food so desired is what you talked about earlier. You know, the non-traditionalist spirit of the new Israeli cuisine, the no rules, just fun attitude. It works, and that's what made it really exciting. And it's true about restaurants that before, you know, in the US, they would call themselves Middle Eastern and try to kind of hide the fact that they're Israelis. It's just the opposite now. So yes, I think that fun attitude, the fact that, you know, chefs are not afraid and are actually very much encouraged to invent new things all the time, that what really made Israeli food so popular here and in Europe too. And it's yeah, and I think that then influenced Palestinian chefs to write their own cookbooks, open their own places. I mean, this is a good cycle that's happening here. And I don't think it's starting to go down yet. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I think, and you know, I think there is another reason that restaurant food culture, Israeli restaurants are so appealing. It's not just the food. It's kind of a very relaxed and fun. I mean, Israelis are the least formal nation in the world. When people ask me a dress code in Israel, in restaurants or otherwise, you say you can only be overdressed. You cannot never be underdressed unless you come, I don't know, with flip-flops and shorts to a good restaurant. Otherwise, I mean, that may be too much, but other than that, t-shirts are fine, jeans are fine, sandals are fine. And the fact that we don't really have the, you know, patience for first course, main course, second, we kind of like to share, we like to eat with our hands, we speak with our hands. There is something very, how should I say, bilti emtsai, something very direct, something very fun and relaxed about the Israeli food culture. And I think it appeals to a lot of people around the world. I've been hearing amazing things about, bless you, amazing things in restaurants of Asaf Granit in Paris, that they just go crazy about all these, you know, Israeli fun places. Maybe it's even more appealing than the food itself, or as appealing as the food itself, or it's all kind of linked together, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like Asaf Granit's restaurants in Israel, like in Machne Yehuda, and then Eyal Shani's Miznon fast food places in Israel and now in New York and other places. You know, the servers and the chefs and the cooks, they start to sing all together at once, and the whole restaurant is like clapping and having fun, and they do that here too sometimes, and that's kind of unusual. It for me, it feels a little forced sometimes, but it is fun. It's really fun. Not to mention, I remember sitting a few years ago with my kids who were there at the age of 16 or so in one of Eyal Shani's Miznon, pita places, and the manager asked them if they wanted some arak, some liqueur shots to drink. And they said, yeah, sure. And she asked us, are there 18 yet? Because in Israel, that's the age for, and we said no. And she said, oh, it's okay. And she gave them that anyways. So that's fun for sure and nice, but the food is also amazing.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
If you book the 9 p.m. table at Hasalon, Eyal Shani's restaurant in New York City, then you can dance on the tables. That's the rule.
Yeah.
By the way, Barbunya is probably one of my favorite restaurants in New York City.
Yeah.
It's the place I most consistently go back to. We're almost out of time, but I want to leave us with one question, which is, what are your hopes, predictions for what happens to Israeli food in the next 75 years? What happens? What comes next?
I mean, I think one thing that I would like to see, and I hope this answers your question, is to see more fancy chefs restaurants in Israel that concentrate actually in traditional Jewish diaspora cuisine. I mean, I love the chefs' restaurants that are so inventive, and that's why that's what Israelis love the most. Actually, in a funny way, American tourists that visit Israel, that I send them to some of my favorite chef's restaurant, they're disappointed because they want to sometimes see the traditional food. So I would love to see some more traditional food in fancy settings. We have many low-key traditional food restaurants from all over the Jewish diaspora in Israel, but I would love to see some more fancy, more detailed, nice service, no sandals, no flip-flops restaurants with that food.
These are designers flip-flops that we wear.
Yeah, of course.
Designer flip-flops.
Of course.
I think I totally get it. I totally agree with you. I think it's extremely important that we preserve Jewish cuisines that are actually, many of them cuisines on the verge of extinction. But I don't think this will happen. I think what happens now is, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but my feeling is, for example, if you just look at dishes that became famous, let's say, over the last 5 or 6 years, there are no shakshukas there. There are arayos. Okay, we have, because I think in maybe 10, 15 years, we get a little bit less crazy. We'll kind of settle down, get used to the fact that we're here, but I think we'll be even more local. We'll learn deeper about local traditions and local foods. Maybe there will be a lot of sabich things. I mean, things that were kind of really invented here or developed here.
Right.
Because my feeling is that if I look at the restaurants that are currently, the most prominent ones, they really go deep into learning not just Palestinian or Levantine cuisine, local ingredients. Okay, working with various kinds of olive oil, experimenting. We haven't talked about wine, but this is also part of the food culture. And now, if let's say 20, 30 years ago, the question was, can we make good wines in Israel? Now it's obvious we can make good wines in Israel. The question that is raised now is, what is Israeli wine? Can we produce something that has uniquely Israeli local flavor and aroma? And we're using Asian varieties of grapes. So I think this is where we're going, because in 75 years, we won't be, this very, very young country that just got created. Hope everything will be good and well in Israel in 75 years. We won't be here to witness it. We pray to God, and we go to the rallies every week to make sure that Israel is alive and well and in democracy, which is very important for culture in general and for culinary culture in particular. But I think we'll be more local, more settled, and that's my prediction. And yes, I hope we will preserve some of the Jewish cuisine, but I'm not sure it will be as evident in restaurants. That's my
Right.
feeling.
No, I'm sure. I mean, it's already preserved, just with all the amazing cookbooks that each concentrate in one specific community from a specific
You
diaspora.
almost don't see it in restaurants. I mean, you do see it,
Exactly.
as you say, in the simple kind of working kitchens, but they did try to open like a fancy Moroccan, a fancy Persian. It just didn't work.
Right.
And we can dedicate another hour trying to figure out why.
Of course, yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I'm sure it will be preserved, just not in restaurants, in fancy restaurants. Yeah.
There were so many comments saying thank you so much for such an awesome conversation, and I really echo that as well. Like I said, every time I have the chance to spend time with you both, I learn so much. My associate editor and I were back channeling. We're like, oh my God, this is so great. This is so great. So thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts, your visions, and your deep knowledge with us. And can we do this again next week?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for having this chance to talk.
Yes,
yes, the recording will be available. We will share it in an email. It will go up on YouTube. So if you didn't get to be here for the whole time, or you want to watch it again, or you want to share it, it will be available. Thank you guys so much, and look forward to seeing you next time.
I see somebody wants a round 2 next week, so
yeah.
We're in, right? We can do it a weekly thing.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Dream.
Thank you. It was so much fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Bye.